Hi, Mike.
Good morning.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good, good.
Glad you're here.
It's good to be here. I bet you are. You might have to pinch hit, huh? Next week, by the way, Mike is preaching on Palm Sunday. It is going to be awesome. Make sure that you are here for that as we launch into Holy Week. Hey, I want to remind you that if you're in the room, there's a handout that you receive or can get a hold of if you when you walk in. If you don't have one, slip your hand up. We'll make sure that it gets into your hands so you have something to look at. Onliners, that always comes in our Saturday update. We'd love for you to have that handy as well. If you don't get our updates, just email us at info@srpc.org, and we'll make sure to put you on our mailing list. We'd love to have you connect with us in that way. Well, as I mentioned at the outset, we're moving along in our series called Crossroads, and we're taking a look at Jesus' journey to Jerusalem and the cross. We began this several weeks ago with this remarkable moment at a place called Caesarea Philippi. It's when Jesus took sort of a little bit of a straw poll from his followers. He said, hey, who do people say that I am? And then really pressed the question and say, well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? It was in that moment that Peter really stood forward and he said, you know what? You are the Messiah. You're the Son of the living God. It was an amazing declaration. From that moment on, the Bible says, Jesus began to explain to them that he was going to go to Jerusalem, that he was going to be arrested, that he was going to suffer, that he was going to die and then rise again. So Jesus receives this affirmation as truth. He is the Messiah. But he reconstructs and reinvents the nature of what the Messiah is so radically that it's virtually unrecognizable. And we've seen along the way in this journey how the disciples are trying to grasp this, and they're missing it time and time again. Let me just remind you of where we've been. Jesus began by saying, the road to follow me, I'm taking the road of self-denial and the road to the cross. And as followers, that's your road too. If anyone wants to be my disciple, he must take up his cross, deny himself. That's the road that we're on. We learned then that in Jesus, power and faithfulness go together. We looked at this incredible experience that Jesus had with three of his disciples, an experience of the transfiguration, where his face changed, where his clothes changed, where the voice from heaven, the voice of his Father, confirmed, this is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him. Jesus was confirmed in who he is as Messiah, and then he was faithful to his mission. He went down the mountain into the valley of suffering, because that's the road to the cross. We learned through Pastor Don that greatness and power are misunderstood by us in this world, and Jesus again redefines it. We all aspire to be great in some area of life. And in fact, in our world, the road to greatness is often something that we fight and claw and scratch for. Jesus puts a child in the middle of all of the disciples, and he says, true greatness is in taking the lowest position. Again, this radical redefinition of what it's about. And then we learned last week through this parable of the workers in the vineyard that on Judgment Day, pride will cause many who are first to be last. This is a disruptive parable because it helps us realize the fact that spiritual pride can make us, listen, envious of God's generosity. Can you imagine that? Pride so works internally that we can actually become envious of God's generosity. That's where we've been on the road to Jerusalem and to the cross. So today I want to read for you from Matthew chapter 20 as we continue on this journey where Jesus has to gather the disciples again and get some things clear with them. Let me read beginning with verse 20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, kneeling down and asked a favor of him. By the way, her sons are James and John, part of that inner circle, Peter, James, and John, the three that were closest to Jesus. Came with her sons, kneeling down, asked a favor of him. What is it you want? Jesus asked. She said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your kingdom." "You don't know what you're asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or my left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father." When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Would you pray with me? God, we ask once again today that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts would be pleasing, would be acceptable in your sight. God, thank you that you are our rock. And thank you for being our Redeemer. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen. My daughter Courtney is in her 8th year as an elementary school teacher. She teaches first grade. And you think about the formative nature of first graders and how important it is to build in them foundational things academically so that they can grow and progress and move on. Right? So we talk about first graders. And one of the things that she said just sort of blows me away because I'm thinking academic, right? She goes, "You know what? One of the hardest things for first graders to learn is how to line up." She said, when I ask kids to line up at the beginning of the year, it is chaos because kids don't know how to line up. Every instinct when you line up, especially as a kid at that age, is to glob together or push your way to the front of the line. And the truth is this, that is a lifelong problem, right? That even adults are prone to push their way to the front, maybe not in a line, but in terms of their ambition. Trying to gain advantage over others is not a new problem. It's a problem that happened even with Jesus' disciples way, way back then. The disciples struggled with this very issue, especially as they had crystal clear thinking now that Jesus was the Messiah, that Jesus is Lord, that Jesus has a kingdom that's coming. All of those horrible human instincts to vie for power, to push your way to the front, come into play. And we're going to take an inside look today at how that played out among those who were closest to Jesus. It's amazing to me that all of these things happened as they were following Jesus to Jerusalem and the cross, as Jesus was explaining to them over and over again what it was going to look like for him to go to Jerusalem and to suffer on the cross. All this sort of worst instincts of people keep coming out in the disciples. So let's take a look at the account. I'll start by reading again the first couple of verses. "Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, kneeling down and asked a favor of him. 'What is it you want?' Jesus asked. And she said, 'Grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right and one at the left in your kingdom.'" Now again, Matthew does such a fabulous job of giving us the context. He puts this account right after Jesus, again, is with his disciples, teaching them, telling them that he's going to go and die, that he's going to suffer. That's the road, and that's their road too. And right after this, it's almost as they were just sort of blind to this. Mom comes up and says, "Hey, I got an idea for my boys," right? And the details in these first two verses really give us an indication of what a mixed bag this is as they're trying to understand Jesus and who he's about, right? So first of all, they kneel in front of Jesus. Think about that. They are acknowledging Jesus as the authority in their lives. They're acknowledging Jesus' lordship. Kneeling is a posture of worship. They're making no bones about the fact that Jesus, you are in charge, right? And so there's this sense of acknowledging the in-chargeness, if you will, of Jesus. They reference in their question, in Mom's question, they reference the kingdom. They understand very clearly where all this is going. It is going toward a kingdom of which they will be a part. Jesus has been clear on that from the beginning. They understand it. So they're kneeling. They understand that there's going to be a kingdom. There is going to be, at the end of the day, there's going to be a rulership and a reigning that comes in and through Jesus. But they have a profound misunderstanding of who Jesus is as the Messiah and the nature of his kingdom. They're still stuck in this mindset of a kingdom of pomp and of power, not a kingdom of suffering and servanthood, a kingdom of pushing your way to the front and making sure that you're in the front of the line, not a kingdom of suffering and servanthood. Remember, too, that, as I mentioned before, James and John, they're part of this inner circle. They're the key three. Peter, James, and John. With Jesus, they hung out with him more than any of the other disciples. And so even in the inner circle, there's this pushiness, there's this competitiveness, there's this sense of misunderstanding Jesus and the kingdom. So Jesus responds. He says, you don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink? We can, they answered. Yeah, we're in. Right? Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup. And then goes on to say, but the Father's in charge of who sits where in my kingdom. You will indeed drink from my cup. Now that word cup is the biblical expression for destiny. Jesus said, you're going to have the destiny that I have, the destiny of suffering and death. You are right about that. Right? But it's up to my Father to decide who's on the right and who's on the left. Question is, did it happen? The answer is yeah, it did. In Acts chapter 12, verse 2, we read that James was killed by the sword on Herod's orders. He died by execution. In Revelation chapter 1, we hear from John, this same brother, who with his brother and mom knelt at Jesus' feet. And John has been banished to the island of Patmos. So Jesus speaks truth. He speaks prophetically. They do drink of the cup of suffering and death. And the Father will decide, not Jesus, who's on the right and who's on the left. Now, this moment is not lost on the other disciples, right? I don't know how close they were to earshot, but they knew what was going on here, and it isn't lost. So listen to what happens. When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the two brothers. So Jesus called them together. He said, look, we need to talk. He called them together, and he said, you know the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Now, that's a pretty powerful verse in and of itself. But if you look at the Greek language, there's an important sort of prefix to the word Lord and authority that we need to talk about for just a moment. It's a prefix kata, K-A-T-A. And what it does is it makes those words even stronger. So the words actually, a more accurate translation of the meaning of the words is domineering and authoritative. Jesus says, you know the world that we live in. People who are in power dominate other people. People who are in power are authoritarian in their rulership. That's the way it works in this world. In the Greek language, the word for Lord and authority are better translated domineering and authoritative, or authoritarian. And think about this for a moment. We actually know what this looks like. We're seeing this play out on the world stage, and it is brutal. It's brutal. If you look at images from Ukraine, if you look at images of meetings that Putin has with his advisors. You understand domineering and authoritarian, and you understand the brutal nature of what happens in those environments. And here's the thing, it's perhaps a little bit shocking, but Jesus states this as it's just the honest truth. It's just the reality of this world. It's what the kingdom of this world is all about. You just need to know going in that this is what this world offers. This is what worldly kingdoms offer. And then he says this, not so with you. You're not going there. Not in my kingdom. That's not what my kingdom is about. Jesus is setting up this contrast of kingdoms. And he's saying, here's the reality about the kingdoms of the world, and here's the reality of my kingdom. They're different, and let me tell you how they're different. Let me tell you about my kingdom. Let me tell you about the character of my kingdom leaders. Are you ready for this? Verses 26 through 28. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. The word must in the Greek is not a word to be missed either. It's the word estai. It's a word that signals a command. You must be this. You must do this. This is a command. Jesus didn't say, I've been thinking. I would recommend that you have more of a servant attitude. He didn't say that. He didn't say, try thinking of it this way. Instead of being a mean person, why don't you be a nice person? Jesus didn't say, well, here's a suggestion for you. Why don't you try serving a little more? None of that. He says, it is not going to be like that with you. Here's what the kingdom, my kingdom, is like. You must be like this, or you're not a part of my kingdom. I mean, this is tough stuff. As Messiah, Jesus says, I am Lord of my kingdom, and you are under my command, and I am commanding you, be a servant and be slave-like in your service to others. That's the text. That's the lesson Jesus is giving his disciples. And so we have to ask ourselves today, what is the place of ambition under the lordship and the leadership of Jesus Christ? Because, again, at a human level, we all have ambition. We said that at the beginning. Human ambition is strong, and it starts in first grade or before that, right? When you're pushing your way to the front of the line, and it matures and develops some more hidden and even some more devious kinds of things later on in life. Human ambition is strong. Our human instinct is to push our way to the front. And how does that fit? Here's the question. How does that fit in God's kingdom? Well, the truth is, it doesn't. But here's how we walk through that. And that's where we're going to land today. First, the struggle with ambition is honest and it's necessary. We have to acknowledge the struggle with ambition, and we have to take it seriously as a follower of Jesus. If you don't know yourself to be a person with ambition, sometimes misguided ambition, then you're not being honest with yourself. If I don't know that about me, I'm not being honest with myself. We have to acknowledge that struggle and take it seriously. And a question that's so important to ask is, where is my ambition showing up in unhealthy ways? And how is that affecting my relationship in unhealthy ways? And it happens in the world that we live in, certainly. But I need to tell you, it happens in the church too. Right? I've been at board meetings, not in this church. Thank the Lord. I've been in board meetings at other churches where we are wrestling over a financial gift that comes with a string attached. And sometimes the string is about a cause that's completely beyond the scope of the church's ministry, but something that person wants. And I'll give money if you do that with it. Sometimes those strings come in the form of the desire to have plaques with names on them, or memorializing a particular person. And the gift is tied to what you will do to acknowledge or recognize after the gift. See, the struggle with ambition is one that we deal with even spiritually within the church. Spiritual ambition can show up in who you choose to talk with before or after a service. What does that look like? Who are they? How do they line up in the context of the church and where we are in the pecking order, right? Spiritual ambition can come in the form of trying to leverage your way into leadership in the church. One of my favorite stories a pastor friend of mine told is of a person coming up to him after church one day. And they were in the fellowship hall, and the person came up and just gave him an earful about leadership in the church and how they had never been tapped to be a leader in the church and how they had so much to offer and they had such an important ministry, and yet it seemed like year after year after year they were just being overlooked, and it was just frustrating and angering this person. And the pastor looked at the person and said, I thank you for sharing that. I need to tell you, I've never seen you throw away a paper cup. And the person's like, what? He said, well, here's the thing. He said, after church, every week we have fellowship. And we have plates and cups and napkins, and people come and they drink and they eat and they do things and they leave them. And I've never seen you pick up and throw away a paper cup. You see, the pathway to leadership, the road to leadership in this church is through servanthood. I've never seen you do that. You see, the struggle with ambition is real because it's our struggle. It's a human struggle. Here's what Proverbs 18:12 says. Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. Paper cups get thrown away before you're tapped for leadership. That's just the way it works in the kingdom. Each week in the handout, I've been offering spiritual practices, and one of the practices this week is, as it has been in previous weeks, is just to have a conversation with God. I want to just point that out to you again today, but look at the first conversation you can have with God. Have a conversation about where you've seen ambition get out of hand in your life. Have relationships been damaged because of that? Ask God to show you any spiritual ambitions that have put you at odds with people in the church. What step will you take toward healing and reconciliation? See, those are questions that we have to ask ourselves and have to talk to God about if we're honest about our struggle with ambition. Secondly, when we think about ambition and lordship in God's kingdom, Jesus' followers live different. Jesus' followers, they just do life different. And Jesus couldn't have been more clear about this. He said, you know the way the world works. Here's what people do in our world. You don't do that. If you follow me, you must do life different. And he got really specific. He said, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. So this week, let me challenge you, let me invite you to embrace what it looks like to do life different, to live different by serving someone or serving somewhere with humility and with selflessness. Listen, not because you're a nice person, but because you follow a Lord who is Lord and King of a different kind of kingdom. Not because you're nice, but because you follow a Lord who has a different kind of kingdom. How many of you know Don and Beth Busboom? Would you raise your hand? They're sitting right over here in our church. Don and Beth, founding members of SRPC. And they're incredible people. I've known Don and Beth for 25 years. And you know what people would say of Don and Beth? I'm sure you guys hear this all the time. I'm sure you hear people say, they are so nice. You may even have said that about Don and Beth. They're so nice. Can I tell you something? I've known Don and Beth for 25 years. They are not nice people. They're not. Don and Beth are people of a different kingdom. And because they are people of a different kingdom, they live differently. And what looks like on the surface level to be nice is actually a different kingdom. I'm growing in this conviction of my own life that I don't want to be nice. I don't want people to say, oh, Mark, he's so nice. I want people to recognize that I'm a part of a different kingdom. And that kingdom looks so different than the world. That sometimes the world looks at that and goes, oh, that's so nice. No, it's not nice. It's a different Lord. It's a different kingdom. If you follow Jesus, you have to do life different. Finally, when it comes to ambition and lordship, here's the good news. Bad decisions do not disqualify disciples. Think of this, right? Yeah, someone amen to that, right? Bad decisions don't disqualify disciples. James and John, these two key leaders of Jesus, they come with mom and they make fools of themselves really in front of Jesus. And he didn't kick them out. I mean, wouldn't it have been easy for Jesus to go, I've tried. Next man up, right? You're out. He didn't do that. He didn't kick. Bad decisions don't disqualify disciples. Jesus keeps them with him. In fact, he uses their worst moment to make a clear statement about the kingdom. At what was probably their worst moment of foolish ambition, of a divisive request, of selfish initiative, he takes that and he reshapes it into a teaching moment, and he doesn't disqualify those two disciples. And you know why? Because of the cross. Because the cross is on the horizon. And the cross is big enough to absorb our dumb decisions. The cross is big enough to absorb the things that we would think would disqualify us as followers. The cross is big enough to absorb our journey, which is full of twists and turns and thrills and spills and bad mistakes along the way. The cross is big enough, and Jesus shows that it is by allowing them to stay. I hope in your conversation with God this week, this is kind of a weird thing to hope for, but I hope, and I hope in mine too, that you and I remember something that we've done or said out of selfish ambition that makes us cringe. Oh, I said that. I did that. I can't believe that. I hope that happens to us, because in that moment is an opportunity to remember the cross. The cross is the reason that Jesus can keep us close even after our worst mistakes, even after our worst falls, even after our worst expressions of selfishness. It's the cross that will transform us into servants who will live sacrificially. Not only absorb our mistakes, but transform us into servants who will serve sacrificially. Only the cross can do that. That's why Jesus kept him. And frankly, that's why he keeps me. I would have been booted long time ago. But I'm not alone in that. And you know that. So, today it's so important and so right and fitting that we end at the table. Because it's here at the table that Jesus both absorbs everything that you and I have done that is cringe-worthy and transforms us into servants who lead and love like him. That's what this is about. I pray today as we come to the table, we would recognize that we can't pull this off on ourselves, on our own. This isn't a matter of sucking it up, of picking ourselves up, of trying harder, of doing better. None of that. This is saying, apart from you, I can do nothing. And you don't let me go when I fail. And because of you, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Even live a life of servanthood in a world that looks so different. That's good news. That's the gospel. That's where we're at today. It's for you. It's for me. Amen.